Have U.S. consumers finally hit that mythical wall? Not just in terms of retail sales, but spending overall. U.S. retailers have continued to send warning signs that they're seeing some changing habits in U.S. consumers. And it's not just those that you might expect. We've heard from the dollar stores just recently saying that that their customers that normally shop in dollar stores can no longer afford to shop in dollar stores. Just last month, higher end retailer Target said they want to turn their Target stores into dollar stores because they're finding higher end customers that usually shop at Target aren't able to do so as much anymore. Here's what Target said back in February. Target Corporation announced its new low price owned brand, Dealworthy, designed to give consumers incredible value on nearly 400 everyday basics. With Dealworthy, Target is offering more options at lower prices, starting at less than $1, while strengthening its portfolio of own brands. Dealworthy is also backed by Target's own brand promise, and on and on and on. Essentially, the theme is consumers are hunting for bargains. That's when they're hunting it all. So all of the entire retail landscape in the United States is telling us consumer habits really are changing. We heard this going back to last fall, September and October. And now we have not just the government statistics that back that up, we also have the behavior of the retailers themselves saying, hey, look here, something has changed as far as U.S. consumers. So, Steve Van Meter, my question to you is, what is it that changed? Because from what I see in the stock market and what I see from commentary in the financial press or from Jay Powell, the FOMC of the Federal Reserve, everybody's doing just fine here. The economy is hitting that Goldilocks scenario. So why are retailers reacting as if their customers are out of money?
Yeah, Jeff, come on. Don't you understand? The labor market in the U.S. is strong and robust. We are going to achieve a no landing, maybe at worst a soft landing scenario. And look at the equity markets. They're all-time highs. I mean, this is the wealth effect. This is Alan Greenspan's dream. There should be money flooding the economy as wealthy people are voting with their dollars and their wallet and spending money like crazy. So what you're trying to tell me here is that none of that is true.
Sadly, that does appear to be the case. Like I said, retail sales report, which started out relatively decent, last fall, October, November, December, but then recent subsequent revisions to the statistics show that Christmas was a complete bust. January was really bad because consumer spending actually fell in terms of retail sales, which again, we hear this throughout the retail segment saying something really happened when we hit 2024. And even some other statistics, for example, Bank of America. Bank of America has said, we keep seeing weakness in higher income household spending. And though it might be strong at the very top end, it seems to be more and more the middle, not just the lower end of the income spectrum, which usually those people usually suffer any type of these economic circumstances like this. But it seems to be the middle and even upper income parts of the economy that are really the ones that everyone's talking about. Like Target's, we're going to make our stores into a dollar store. That's what they're talking about. The middle to upper income segments that are really struggling in a way that maybe they haven't been before.
Yeah, Jeff, and a lot of this just starts to make a little bit of sense when you dig just a little bit deeper under the data, because one thing we keep hearing from policymakers is, well, wage growth is still there. Well, I've got news for them. Wages go up actually during a recession too. I mean, it's not like wages go negative. It's not like people go to work and say, hey, boss, I think you're struggling here. I'll take a big pay cut so you could stay in business. That doesn't happen. They lay people off. Well, granted, we are seeing a slowdown, deceleration of wages, but the bigger issue here is hours work continues to be relatively weak. So you think about this from the consumer perspective here, and all we hear in the headlines is, well, wages keep going up. That's inflationary pressure. There's going to be this wage price spiral, which clearly we're not seeing, because if there was, Target wouldn't become a dollar store. Dollar store wouldn't want to become a penny store. And Walmart, I hear, is trying to get wealthy people in by upscaling. Look, none of this would make any sense unless you start to understand that the U.S. labor market is not as strong and robust as it appears. Now, granted, we're not seeing lights out on initial claims numbers. Continuing claims are relatively stable at the moment, around 1.8 million. Granted, as we've talked about, historically low, but still in the terms of the cycle high. The issue here is the demand for U.S. labor hasn't blown apart, but employers keep trimming hours here and there, leads to slightly smaller paychecks. And I think what we're seeing now, Jeff, is retailers start to respond to that and say, hey, you know what? Maybe consumers are just out of money because we already know they're out of credit.
Yeah, there's credit to consider. There's also the psychological impact, not the wealth effect in the stock market, because that doesn't really apply to most Americans or most consumers around the world for that matter. You have the inverse wealth effect from a labor market that is not as robust as it is described, because you're sitting there and you see one of your coworkers, you get called into the boss's office and the boss tells them, I got to cut you 5 hours this week and probably next week and maybe next month too. You're thinking, well, what am I the next one that has to have my hours cut? Am I about to be converted from full time to part time? I also know that companies are not hiring out there. It really does have a major impact on your psychology. You start to think, well, I might need to tighten my belt. I was going to go out and shop and buy this new electronic gadget, but you know what? Maybe I'll just save that for the summertime. Hopefully by then everything's much better. And that's what these retailers are keep telling us. In order to attract shoppers into their stores, shoppers usually they don't have any trouble attracting, shoppers that usually spend freely once they're there. They have to be more attentive to try to all of these different gimmicks to get them to part with funds, because it's not strictly about, hey, I'm out of credit. I'm not losing my job, but there is definitely some type of behavioral change that's being picked up, and it's causing behavioral changes in the retail segment, which does it flies in the face of the idea that everything in the US economy is grand. And of course, behind all of this, as you know, Steve, we've got the fact that prices did change considerably over the past 3 years. And when we talk about disinflation or even deflation, we've never said that prices are going back to the way they were in 2020. And that's one of the things I think people finally are coming to grips with. As we get into disinflation, that sounds good at first. I mean, it's better than the alternative, but it sounds like, oh, disinflation would mean we're going back to where prices were in 2019. So, hey, everything's going to be great ahead of time. And then you realize disinflation means, well, the rate of increase is slowing down and it might reverse a little bit, but we're never going back to where it was in 2020. And that's a whole different thing. So you're thinking, as a worker, I just had my income changed, not voluntarily because prices surged. I'm never going to get that pricing power back. And oh, by the way, the labor market is actually bad. So even if I tried to get that pricing power back, there's really no way for me to do it. And on top of all that, I have to worry about whether or not I'm actually going to have the same amount of job and income that I had before. When you stop and think about it, all of the stuff that retailers are saying really actually makes a whole ton of sense.
It really does, Jeff, because we talk about this disinflation thing, and there's two ways you can look at it. One, you could say there's an increase in supply that exceeds demand, so then you get a natural slowdown in price growth. Or, of course, we know what the Fed wanted to do was decrease demand because, well, they don't own any factories anyways, so it's not like they could increase demand if they wanted to. And that's actually the negative part to this. So we know that disinflation is occurring because demand goes down. And we can come back right just to the factory sector, because you mentioned, maybe the workers getting called in the office and getting their hours cut. But I promise you, they know that's going to happen before it even does, because they've been going to work. And what do they notice? What do all employees visibly see? Hey, the number of new orders are decreasing or slowing. And they start to ask about that. They'll go to the salespeople. Hey, what do you have in the pipeline? Do you have something coming? Because while they're not doing new orders, they shift over to the backlogs, things that just were low priority stuff that there wasn't an urgency for. And they said, well, we've got plenty of that. We'll work on that. Well, as that thins down, and then they go back and see the new order book isn't very fat, they start to realize real quick that demand is falling, hours are going to get cut. And when you go home from work and you start talking to your spouse and your family about, hey, you know what, things at work aren't looking good, they're not talking about those 6-month projections, that we see from these Fed surveys and other surveys about how grand things are going to be. They're saying, hey, look, right now, this is not good. So we have to cut our spending. And in turn, you start to create this downward cycle where I stop spending, I'll cut my spending back, which then affects your job, Jeff. And then you cut spending and it affects the next person. And you start to see this downward spiral that the CPI is just telling us is real demand destruction.
Yeah, and again, it's not just the workers that you would expect at the lower end of the income spectrum. It's those moving further up, which is really what maybe has been the big change recently. There was another retailer came out just this past week, Lululemon, a higher end retail outfit in the United States. Their CEO said, "Well, the rest of the world looks okay, but the quote was there has been a shift in the U.S. consumer behavior of late, and we're navigating what has been a slower start to the year in this market." Which is supposed to be the market where everyone is doing really well. We're talking about higher end US consumers. They're the ones that are supposed to be looking at Wall Street and New York Stock Exchange and the Dow Jones and saying, let's spend, baby. Let's spend as much as we possibly can because good times are here. We all know the stock market is the preeminent barometer of the economic circumstance, plus benefit to wealthy Americans. They're now wealthier because stock prices are going up. So the very segment that should be feeling the wealth effect is saying we're tightening up here. We're changing our behavior. We're not going to go buy some yoga pants like we were just last month. That is, I think, one of the biggest, not just a contrast, but a serious, significant contrast that should be carrying more weight that really, I think it's buried underneath basically the stock market, right? Everybody's talking about shares at all-time highs, and then nobody's talking about the lack of wealth effect from it.
Yeah, Jeff, because you think about it, if somebody's net worth is, say, at their all-time high and they're concerned about spending money, it should tell you something. It should tell you a lot of issues that they're saying, yeah, you know what, I'm rich right now, but man, looking at my business or looking at my employer, look at what's going on. This isn't inspiring me with a lot of confidence in the economy or where this is going to go out there and spend money on things that I could afford because my net worth is up. But I'm just afraid that maybe I can't make the payments or this is going to be unsustainable. So they're cutting back too. And that you said, like you said, is not a good sign at all. You're right. The lower income cohorts, any slight slowdown is just devastating to them. But this should not be a problem for the wealthy. They're just looking and seeing what's coming. And again, we come back to these Fed surveys 6 months from now, everyone says things are going gangbusters. If they were, these rich people would be spending, no questions asked, but they're not.
Well, that raises a whole bunch of questions, including where is all of this weakness actually coming from? And one of it is, as we just said, I mean, consumer prices have really pressured incomes, especially in the middle areas and the lower areas of the income spectrum. But more than that, we have to say, the labor market statistics that do show substantial deterioration, the hours worked that we keep coming back to, the lack of full-time jobs. How many full-time jobs? It's almost a couple million that have disappeared and a couple million that were converted to part-time. That has a massive impact. But where is that coming from? And that's not coming from consumer prices that are suddenly exploding higher. That's coming from business owners saying, well, we see revenues start to soften here. And as Steve was saying, for manufacturers, even service providers to a good extent too, we don't have the same amount of new business coming in. So what do we pay all you people for? Why are you here? You show up for work every day, and we kept you on because we didn't want to get rid of you in case the economy did pick up radically, and it doesn't seem to be doing that. Now business owners are saying, revenue growth slowing down. We don't have a lot of work for all our workers. Let's at least respond and cut our costs, cutting back hours and then doing, some of these conversions. We're going to stop hiring people, which has a huge, enormous recession-like impact on the entire economy. And that's what we keep coming back to. What everybody's actually telling us here is that this stuff is actually happening. It's not a risk. It's not something we're talking about 7 months down the road. It's been happening for several months already. And the one part that's missing is just the massive amounts of layoffs, but everything else that you associate with recession is playing out to the point that even middle and higher income Americans are saying, hey, we're not really liking what's going on here.
Yeah, Jeff, because what did we hear during the pandemic, right? Or post that, everybody overhired. And we're just trimming a little bit here. And that was kind of the initial belief. And then that kind of changed a little bit. We're going to have to trim a few more. And next thing you know, now we're trimming again. And that's not a sign that I made a mistake and hired too many people. That's a sign that demand is getting weaker. And of course, there's this belief, at least particularly from the Fed, that, hey, you know what? All these people can lose their job. It's okay. We need that to happen to bring inflation down and not to worry. The economy is so strong. The labor market's so robust. Well, they'll get another job. Problem is, as you know, Jeff, we have seen these warn notices go out and we have not seen them translate into a big increase in initial claims yet, mainly because people that are getting those notices have gotten some form of severance. My bet, though, is they're not spending like crazy because they've gone out and they've looked at the labor market, and against the JOLT survey, which says there's a gazillion jobs for everybody, they're finding out that maybe there's a lot of openings, but there's not a lot of hirings. And that's a challenge here that we continue to see for the economy, that just these political elites and these central bankers don't want to admit that the economy is slowing. But yet, all the evidence suggests we're still on this glide path down. We just haven't hit anything to send the next big drop.
Yeah, on the JOLTS data, you're right. The job openings is what everybody actually looks at, and that's the most worthless statistic that the government puts out there. As you mentioned, there's so many dummy postings, double postings, not realistic postings, that it's just, there's no way that there's that many job openings actually available. We know that because nowadays there are plenty of workers available that would go to a job, yet the hiring numbers that are also part of JOLTS have fallen off a cliff. They've fallen sharply in a way that you only see in recessions. So as far as companies having lots of work available, none of that is real. And pretty much everybody out there that is looking for a job knows it. They know that there's no jobs available. You look at social media, which is always an iffy proposition, I'll give you that. We look across social media, the tone has completely changed. We went from the great resignation, go to any job, just pick your career, any salary you want, to holy crap, I better not lose my job, because there is nothing out there right now except if you want to work at Starbucks. That's the only place that's hiring. And that has an enormous implication, but also tells us a great deal about the way in which the economy is actually operating. It's not operating in the way that it's seen. I mean, even Jay Powell said it repeatedly. He mentions the term nonlinearity, which really does apply here to a whole lot of economic processes, not just layoffs in the labor market, which is basically everything seems fine, everything seems fine, everything seems fine, and then all of a sudden it's not fine. And we're at that period where we're getting all of this information coming in saying, we're in the not fine danger zone. We're in the not fine danger zone. Employers know it. Retailers know it. A lot of consumers appear to know it. It's just that it doesn't fit with the stock market and the mainstream narrative of a strong soft landing economy.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Because if the economy was strong and we were seeing a demand for labor, the first thing employers would do is raise the number of hours worked. It's really simple. You take your existing workforce, you bump their hours up until they start to scream about, "Hey, I'm being overworked here," and then you start bringing on more employees. We're seeing the opposite trend in that in every single way. Although I will challenge you on one thing. You said the JOLT survey was the least accurate thing the government puts out. How about the dot plots?
The dot plots, yes. How could we not mention the dot plots, the week in which the FOMC got together? And what do? They rejiggered the 2025 and 2026 dots because they're not really sure how inflation works. So because we're not sure, maybe there's more inflation in the economy. Maybe they need to have a conversation with the CEO of Target or somebody else. That's the dot plot. Thanks, Steve.
Funny.
Or was it the week before?
Maybe I need to grow my hair out.
There you go.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I'll never be able to cut my hair.